Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in amongst the Queen's speech, the farce of what was really a Conservative Party political broadcast that had to be read out by the Queen, she had no choice in the matter, was one of the worst things was another, what I would call, and I have called, a cynical attack on democracy by Boris Johnson, who is seeking to restrict access to voting, which would disproportionately affect poorer people. In other words, the sort of people who don't really vote Conservative. But first, if you find yourself enjoying the video, then please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. So the proposal, for some people, as I've seen on Twitter, may sound perfectly reasonable. So what I need to do is to explain what the issue is, particularly in the UK. So the proposal is that when people go along to a polling station to vote in, say, a general election or indeed anything else, they will have to produce ID. Now, some people may say, well, this sounds perfectly reasonable. After all, if all you have to do is troll along and give your name, how do we know that the person who gives that name is the person who should be voting? Well, a couple of things about this. Actually, that sort of misrepresentation in polling almost never happens. There is a tiny number of people that attempt to do that. But the second thing is this. Not so much of a thing in the UK. Sure, a lot of people do have some form of ID. I have photo ID in the form of a driver's license. An awful lot of people wouldn't have something like that. I mean, to have a driver's license, you obviously have to pay. You know, you're going to have to pay for it. To have a full one, I suppose, you're going to have to pay for the driving lessons, and you're not going to do it unless you can afford a car at the end of it either. But even a provisional costs money. A lot of people on basically no money can't afford that. A passport, similarly, costs money. And again, some people simply can't afford it. There are 11 million people in the UK that may already be eligible, in other words, of voting age, that don't have either a driver's license or a passport. Now, there are other forms of ID that are acceptable, but again, we don't really have them in this country, and they're not necessarily easily obtainable. The obvious one would be an original birth certificate. Now, I don't have my original birth certificate. It was lost in the mists of time. I have a copy. That's not good enough. So if anyone doesn't have their original birth certificate, then that's no use either. So it's like, how are you going to get this form of ID? The only one that a lot of, and again, it's likely to be poorer people that don't have it. Like someone who's wealthier, middle class or above, something like that. You are very likely to have a driving license or a passport. One of those two is very, very likely. There are other ones you could obtain. It could also be argued that if you're, wealthier and you're interested in politics, the sort of person that would go and vote, then you're also more likely to be the sort of person that would put some effort. If you needed ID, you put some effort into doing it. Again, what we're talking about is a group of people, particularly poorer people, already disenfranchised by politics. And you've got to put it, look at it this way in this country. Our democracy already isn't representative of the people. Otherwise, Conservative governments would just never get in. We already have the first past the post. That favours Conservative government. We already have voter registration. Again, this surprises a lot of people in other countries. What, you have to register to vote? Yes, you do. Now, it's not as bad as in the United States where they use voter registration. People will register to vote and then they'll just randomly be dumped off the register. We don't have that in this country. There is an understanding that we want people registered to vote, but nonetheless, there is still a process. If you are not registered to vote, you will not be able to vote come polling day. So yes, it's not automatic. And yes, it should be, and it is in other countries, and there's no earthly reason why people should have to do anything to be registered to vote, because the country must already know about us. If they can issue us with a national insurance number, they know about us. Why are we not automatically registered to vote as well? That is a bafflement, but that is the situation. And now if you add in something like this, it just puts people off. People are already going to be fairly depressed, disenfranchised with the political system, already feel that it's not doing anything for them. It's actually, for quite a lot of people, a big ask just to ask them to go to the polling station and vote in the first place. And now you put this other barrier in the place. But again, for a certain section, how are they going to get it? If you're very poor and you're on benefits, actually, I gather one of the items of ID could be the original benefits letter. But again, it's not any documentation related to the benefits as I understand it. It's specifically this particular letter, which again, after a while, you may not have anymore. Now, even if that's not the case, not everyone, some people are going to be too poor to be able to just get photo ID, but not necessarily, or at least the government doesn't think they're poor enough to need benefits. So again, you wouldn't have access to that as well. Now, when this was put to the government about the problems that you have basically got over 3 million people in this country who will not have access to any of these forms of ID. And, the government said, well, councils can probably do something about that. Now, just saying something like that, first of all, that's quite vague. So what that means is the government have no plans to ensure that people can have access to ID. So what we're talking about is a situation where there will be millions of people in this country who are eligible to vote, but will not be able to because they will not be able to obtain the ID from this list. And the government is not even putting in place something to say, well, okay, we need to make sure that everyone who's eligible will have the ID. So here's this scheme to make sure that that's going to happen and to no cost to the people. They'll just need to fill in a form, which, as I say, is in itself another barrier to voting anyway, because some people don't like forms, but still, it would at least be reasonable. But to vaguely say something about, maybe the council can do something about it, means, one, they have no plan to do anything that would be acceptable. Two, leaving it to the councils like this means they're not going to provide funding for it. Whatever it would be, if a council wanted to do something, would cost. Councils are already strapped for cash. The government are not providing any money for this. And finally, some of those councils aren't going to be keen anyway. If it's a largely conservative council, well, something like this favours conservatives. Why would they put in any effort and any extra spending for money they don't already have to encourage poorer people to vote who don't vote for them anyway? So this is not going to happen. It is an absolute attack on democracy. It mustn't be allowed to happen. The main thing I would say in this one is, much like everything in the Queen's speech today, at the moment it can't happen, can it? Because Boris Johnson does not have a majority in Parliament, so he can't get any of this legislation through unless people who are not his own MPs vote in favour of it. And at the moment, a fair few of them, need to be several dozen of them. So there is that. But it is a serious worry, especially, it's a particular worry when you're talking about having a general election very soon. So when you're talking about a general election very soon and you're going to put something in place that people currently are not ready for, then that suggests that they won't be ready for the general election. It brings into mind the European elections in May, where there were people, British citizens living abroad, that didn't get their voting forms until it was too late, because it takes about a week to get them sent back. So they were effectively unable to vote even though they were eligible, because the forms were sent off too late. And then you had EU citizens in this country who were also eligible to vote, of course, in the EU elections. And they were not permitted to vote either, effectively, because the government had put in place, again, another tier of registration, just a form to be filled in, but they didn't tell anyone about it. Didn't used to be needed to be done. This is not something that's been around for ages. This was just put in place. No one was told about it. And even some people who did, the paperwork was taking so long that by the time it was all sorted, the elections had come and gone. This is going to be exactly the same thing. This is the Conservatives thinking, there's a general election coming up. How can we, the way you're looking at the moment, no party is likely to win a majority. So how can we eke out a few extra seats for ourselves? Can we stop the poor from voting? Yeah, let's put something in place that disproportionately acts as a barrier against poor people. And middle class people wonder what the fuss is about because we've already got ID. And wealthier people who are, or more educated people will again say, well, even if there's an extra step to take place, I'm on it, I'm aware of the news, I know this is coming, I'm going to do it. So there we go. That's the worst thing I think that appeared in the Queen's speech today. Hope you found the video interesting. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details. Until next time, I'll see you later.